Hello, everybody. Welcome to a bonus discussion from MinnMax. MinnMax is a place about games, friends, getting better. I'm Ben Hansen, joined by one Haley McLean.
Hello.
Video game IP lawyer, community manager for MinnMax, super fan of Overwatch, new RTS fan after falling in love with Age of Mythology Retold. So you're the right person to have here, Haley. Also joined by Jacob Geller.
I'm just a guy.
He's a guy, but he talks on YouTube all the time. He won't stop, but he's very curious about the industry, and that's why we also have Jason Schreier here from Bloomberg. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thank you guys for having me.
Yes, it's an honor to have you. We are here to unpack your brand new book coming out October 8th. Yes?
Got it.
Sweet.
First try.
There we go. This is Play Nice, the rise, fall, and future of Blizzard. Oh man, I gotta get my copy. It's already on the shelf. I framed it already. It's on my wall, Jason.
Oh,
trust me.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You
Hey.
could put it in like cracked glass to open it in case you need an emergency Blizzard fix.
That's right. I gotta read that chapter about StarCraft once more. Congratulations on finishing the book, man.
Yes, thank you. I finished it like 6 months ago, and I've just been sitting around waiting for it to come out. Book publishing is so weird, man. When I talk to game developers about this, they're like, what? Because they're all working into the last possible minute fixing bugs.
Right.
But I'm like, yeah, I finished this book in February and just have to wait, which is really frustrating because you have to wait like 7 months before people actually, 8 months in this case, before people actually see what you've done, as opposed to just getting to like hit publish on a video or an article and then everybody, it's out there. In the case of books, you just have to wait, and just been like, just literally every day I Google how many days until October 8th. That's what my life is like right now.
That's so dopey. This is okay. I mean, the waiting thing is really interesting because I feel like at the end of the book, it's like full history of Blizzard. It's awesome. We'll unpack it in a big way here. And then by the end, it's like, and things are starting to look brighter for Blizzard over there. And then it's like, oh, wait, massive layoffs. Like, it feels like it could have, like...
the last chapter.
Yeah. It's funny because I had a different ending in January, and fortunately I had not had to go to the printers yet, and then the layoffs hit. I believe it was January 31st or like thereabouts. I don't remember the exact day, but I immediately emailed my editor and was like, so I need to write us a new final chapter.
Yeah.
And it actually had this perfect kind of it was a perfect ending. I don't want to spoil the way that the book ends, but it actually, because of what happened during that layoff, it actually made for the perfect ending to this particular story, in that it mirrors the beginning, and it actually worked out nicely for this particular story. I knew that like there would probably be some stuff that happened to Blizzard between when I finished the book and when it came out and after it comes out. I mean, I remember when I wrote my first book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, I was like, the future of Destiny, anything could happen. And then like Destiny 2 was announced and came out the same day or like the same week as Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. So that's just what happens. And that's not a problem to me. What was more, but it was serendipitous because the way it would have ended would not have been tonally right if I hadn't fit in the stuff about the layoffs, because I think there was a lot of optimism in even as early as like October of last year when the deal closed. There was a ton of optimism within Blizzard that like, wow, we can get out of the shadow of this Activision C-suite that has made a lot of us really unhappy. Yeah. Microsoft's going to come in. Phil Spencer is saying all the right things. And there was a lot of optimism at that point. And then 3 months later, Phil laid off 1,900 people, and it was just miserable. It was just like, oh, wow, it's just like any other corporation. So yeah, not quite as optimistic anymore.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. And like the entire Xbox deal, that must have been so bizarre. Just, all right, I need to pay really close attention to this story because I know it's going to be a huge thing. And like, I can't finish this book until that deal closes. Oh my God.
What was really weird is that I signed my deal to write the book a little bit before Press Reset came out, which was the spring of 2021.
Okay.
And then about 2 months after that, the California government sued Activision Blizzard for sexual misconduct and harassment, which led to the sequence of events that then led to Microsoft buying Blizzard. So all of that stuff happened after I had already agreed to the book deal. So it was kind of just twist after twist as I was planning out this book, which was just a wild ride. Wild ride.
I should mention real quick before I forget, thank you everybody for clicking on this. Hope y'all enjoy it. This whole discussion is available as a podcast in the Patreon exclusive podcast feed if you're a $5 supporter of MinnMax on Patreon. So thank you for supporting us. You know what that's like, Jason Schreier, your maximum fun plugs over there.
I do, yeah. We have a Triple Click podcast. Go check it out, although I'm sure we have a lot of crossover between our listenership. at this point, especially since we've done some appearances with you guys and whatnot. But yeah, it's that Boko. Got to get that Boko.
Apparently. Okay, I am so thankful. There's a lot of things to unpack with this book. I am thankful for you writing this book for 1,000 different reasons, but I love zooming in. You know, it's so easy in this side of the fence just to be like, oh, this is an interesting story about the game industry. This is an interesting story. And you're just pulled 1,000 different directions. But for you to like fully zoom in, like, let's just really focus on one company and to have now what I would consider, I'd imagine you consider as well, like the definitive book on Blizzard history, and just be able to tie all these threads together, have one dumping ground for, I think it just helps for somebody who's like, I've been a fan of Blizzard for a very long time. I think I get the gist. Then you read this and it's like, no, there's so many little tendrils and threads you don't think of, fascinating little tidbits of like who was involved with this company, who, when. And so I can't thank you enough for making something this compact. Few people do it because, as you have learned, it's a pain in the ass to produce. But thank you for just creating a solid block of gaming history here.
That's very kind of you to say. For the Warcraft 3 chapter, I actually watched quite a bit of your Game Informer coverage of Warcraft 3 Reforged, and it's fun to see that side of things and then kind of know what they're going through on the inside, or like talk to those people when they're not like doing the official press sanctioned, like heavily media trained kind of circuit. It's so interesting. It's really, it does feel like I wish there were books like this for every game company. And no, I will not be doing them. Yeah, thank you, Ben. That's very kind of you to say. I appreciate that. And I hope the book resonates with folks and helps justify my decision to embark on this crazy project.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the really interesting things for me reading it is like we did a gaming confessions episode of MinnMax like a year plus ago at this point. And one of my confessions is Overwatch is the only Blizzard game I have ever played. Like I've never played a Warcraft or a Starcraft or a Hearthstone. And so it was a company that I like knew was important, but because I had never been invested in any of the games, I just kind of didn't really, I wasn't able to articulate like why, like, you know, what is interesting about Blizzard or whatever. And so reading this was like, you know, getting all of that. I was like, oh, if I had played Diablo on, then maybe I would have known this, but now I can just kind of like learn all of it, you know, like Neo being plugged into the Matrix, being like, I understand Blizzard now. I know why they're important.
I really resonate with that too, Jacob. I really only play a crap ton of Overwatch, but Overwatch, and I've played a little bit of World of Warcraft. But what I really liked about this is it captured what it felt like when those other games came out, which games press can so often miss, is like, yeah, here's how much it sold, here's how, you know, many people were playing at the time. But what was the vibe? Like, what was the weird energy in the room when that BlizzCon happened that announced X or that kind of thing, which I always felt like I missed out on coming so late to Blizzard. So I thought the book really captured that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think that what the reason that I chose to tell this story is because the book I think is about a lot more than just Blizzard. And I think there's a lot to get out of the specific Blizzard granular details, but there's also a lot of themes that I think say so much more about the video game industry, whether it's like the craziness of the 90s and the frat house like environments that they all worked in, and the all-nighters and the crazy crunch, which, I mean, crunch today like does not hold a candle to the crunch that they went through back then, all the way up into the Activision drama, which I think is kind of is a big part of the meaty stuff in this book, which says a lot about the tensions between business and creativity, and kind of Wall Street expectations versus what creative people need to innovate, that I think really applies more broadly to the entire industry. And I imagine a lot of people will be reading this book and just like nodding their head furiously as they relate to maybe either of the sides involved or any of the kind of the voices involved in that particular battle.
Yeah, there's so many times like throughout this book where I just felt like, oh, thank God this is in here. And like one of those little details, I mean, talking about Activision and Bobby Kotick, that could be a 3-hour conversation here, or you could write a whole damn book about it, I'd argue, Jason. But like just the fact that you have like Morheim's letter to Bobby Kotick about the need to preserve Blizzard's culture, it's like, this is why this book is great. The fact that we can actually quote from the letter sent to Kotick and get that level of detail from the highest of the high ups at this company. I mean, that's incredible access there.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. The book is based on interviews with about 350 people. 300 of them are Blizzard people. The other 50 are just kind of other Activision or people who are related, people like, I don't know, the Leroy Jenkins folks, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But those, just being able to do that many interviews over the last 3 years has really made it so I could tell the story in as thorough a way as possible, which I was very grateful to all of those folks for taking the time to talk to me and share documents and emails and stuff like that. And yeah, I appreciate that. I'm glad that you appreciated that. I actually saw at one point I saw a Reddit comment when I announced the book being like, "Oh, what's he going to tell us that we don't already know?" Like, "Oh, he's just ready. Like, we all know the history." And I'm like, "No. Like, this is going to fill in a lot of blanks. A large chunk of the book is not previously reported, and I think that's an important part of doing this kind of work, is not to just kind of repackage like history that is already out there, but to be able to tell the story that has not been told before."
It is incredible reading this, and it's like whenever good old Bobby comes up, I like started hearing Jaws music. You know, it's like I think you do a pretty good job of kind of like he starts coming in pretty early, and you're like, oh, okay, I know where this is going, but like to see all of them learn where this is going is this weird kind of like sense of dramatic irony throughout the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love, you mentioned like some 1984 PBS documentary that Bobby Kotick was in. Could I see that somewhere? I was looking around online, I couldn't find it.
Yes, I will send you a link to
Please.
that. It should
Cool
be in
Friday
in the
evening viewing.
citations of the book, but yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's obviously there's a lot of Kotick blame, criticism. There's a lot to unpack there, but at the same time, I love those little moments where you pointed out like Kotick was the first person in the room at the Overwatch pitch to be like, these characters rule. This is going to work. It's like, hey, Bobby, calling it a good way here. Way to go, man.
Off of Torbjorn, which I love, Jason, how you were like, the most World of Warcraft looking one of them all.
This dwarf is going to sell.
I love Torbjorn. Yeah, it's like, I think there's a lot to criticize and malign Bobby Kotick for, and I mean, I'll let people make their own conclusions after reading the book, but for me, it was very important not to portray anybody as kind of a cartoon character, because I really think everybody's kind of, even the billionaires in this world, they have their own points of view, and I think if you're a reporter coming into this and trying to tell a fair story, it's important to try to capture that and to try to tell the most accurate and fair version of the story, which is straight up that like Bobby Kotick would not have gotten to where he was without at least some business sense. He was not a guy. I mean, he was a guy who was definitely had a comfortable upbringing, but he is not the son of a billionaire. He is not someone who just inherited what he got from nepotism. He had some big breaks. He got very lucky in that he met a guy named Steve Wynn, who would go on to change his life, a casino magnate who went on to open a lot of doors for him. But he also made some smart decisions and made some good calls. And he did, love him or hate him, he did grow this massive company he did grow Activision Blizzard like out of bankruptcy to become one of the most valuable companies in the world. So I thought it was important to capture that, and stuff like the Overwatch meeting. I think that helps kind of add a layer of nuance, although I imagine most people will leave this story seeing him as I don't know. I don't want to say villain, an adversary to what people love about Blizzard.
Right. Yeah, I love, and I know Jacob's a sucker for this too, but like I love anytime you dive into specifics, like payroll specifics, numbers, like that is the part also I'm like, oh, I'm so thankful this book exists. Just diving into like, okay, there's a constant struggle about wealth inequality within Blizzard, and being able to lay out like, here's exactly what these numbers are. Here's how much these people were being paid. Here's how much people at other companies were being paid. Then they'd have to get hope for a raise by leaving Blizzard, then coming back to Blizzard, and then they'd have to match that salary from, like, all that stuff is fascinating, especially, you know, when you have that quote about Ibarra. How do you pronounce his last name?
Mike Ibarra, yeah.
Yeah, about him talking about like, oh, the whole idea that the executive suites make a lot of money, that's a pure myth. And it's like, okay, well, here's the actual numbers behind that, just showing how unequal things are.
It's a publicly traded company. You can look up the numbers and know how much money they get. Yeah.
Mike Ibarra, he put it in his mouth a couple times.
The numbers that I was most grateful for having in the book and just like knocked me on my ass is the section about Overwatch League. where they
Right.
talk about, it's like Nate Nanzer, who's the, director of Blizzard's consumer insights person, is like, okay, we're going to sell these Overwatch League teams for like $250K. And then Bobby Kotick comes in and he's like, we are going to sell them for $20 million. And it felt, there are a lot of parts of this that felt very much like the movie Blackberry, which is my kind of like current touch point for like, what is it like for a company to kind of go corporate? And that was just like, $20 million, and then seeing like, okay, how does that pan out? Because it's like, it's not immediately a stupid business decision, but like it is just this complete like scale change in what Blizzard is conceptualizing versus what the C-suite is conceptualizing.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good example of some of the nuance I was talking about earlier, because I think that like to most normal people, that would be just like, Bobby, are you insane? Like esports has never been this big before. Like that doesn't make any sense. You're going to put all these teams $20 million in the hole before they even know how they're going to make money. Like this is baffling. But from Bobby's perspective, and I think this is really interesting, he wanted to bring in people who had experience running sports teams, because his idea was to make this thing the NFL of video games, the biggest esports league ever created. And so he wants to bring in guys like Bob Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, to come run a team. And Bob Kraft is a billionaire. He's not going to pay attention if it's like a $250,000 investment, but like $20 million investment. Maybe if he saw a chance to be like, oh, I'll put in $20 million, make $100 million. You have to work at that scale if you're working with like Bobby's billionaire buddies. And I think that's again, you could point to that and be like, wow, he totally like up all of esports for the rest of time. Like, again, if you were to write the book about how esports failed, I think his moves with Overwatch League would play a center role. But I tried very hard to help people understand what he was thinking at the time. And again, because it's not like you can look at him and be like, oh my God, like what is like, why does he make the money he does? Like, why does he make the decisions he does? He is a bad guy. And I think it's a very fair perspective. But I think as a journalist and even as a reader, I think it's just like, it's a lot more valuable to try to understand what he's thinking than it is to just kind of vilify him in your head as this cartoon character who always wants to do malicious things. It's a lot more valuable, even if you're going to conclude by being like, that guy did some bad things, that guy's kind of evil. I think having his perspective even helps you come to a more educated conclusion on that front. Like, it helps you be able to say, oh, he's evil, I understand where he's coming from, but still an evil guy. Like, I just think that is a more valuable position to be in. Yeah,
so it's nice. I mean, earlier you mentioned that the book is about larger themes than just Blizzard, and you even open it up by saying it's a story about money, power, and the hunt for never-ending growth. And that is a large theme throughout the entire book, and I couldn't stop thinking about that idea of just reading it. And I know it's not what it was like to live it, because it's a condensed version and a lot of business talk, but reading it is just like, this all seems miserable. Who would ever want to be at the top of any company ever? And like, I don't know if you've ever read Disney War. It's a great book about like Disney in the 80s and 90s and stuff. But also just reading that book, it's like, who wants to be an executive at these companies? Like, even a company like Blizzard, that I'm sure from our perspective, Jason, growing up, it's like, they can do no wrong. They're sitting pretty. It's just the infallible company. And then you learn from these inside stories, like, no, everything is stressful all the time. Everything's melting down all the time. Even your favorite, most stable company is not peaceful and stable on the inside. Is that a takeaway from you as well after all these interviews? Is just like, that seems like hell to be at the top of a company like this.
I don't know. I think that like the people who work there, I can't speak for the people who are on the very top, which would be Alan Adham and then Mike Morhaime and then Mike Ybarra and then Bobby Kotick, obviously. But I can't speak for them personally. But I can say that like the people who work there were having a lot of fun. I mean, they get to go in and spend like good friends making video games. And I think the executives got to share some of that as well. But I think there's a turning point here. And I think the kind of the quote of the book to me is a quote that comes in the first act, and it is when millions turn to billions, everything changes.
I wrote that down. Yep.
And I think the reason that that's the quote of the book is that, like, when you hit a certain level of growth or have a certain hit that is just kind of astronomically beyond what you expected, which in Blizzard's case was World of Warcraft, of course, things change for you. And some of them can be good. A lot of people got nice checks. A lot of people got to buy houses and sports cars and are sitting pretty as a result of that. But it also really just irrevocably changed the nature of the company. They went from hundreds of people to thousands of people, and that, I think, had a lot of repercussions. And I don't know. I don't know if like I wonder if you got Mike Morhaime and Alan Adham in a room, if you could ask them, if you could do it again, would you like stay small? Would you keep it at a certain number of people?
Right.
I don't know what they say. But I spoke to Mike Morhaime recently. This is being published after this interview will be live already on Bloomberg, about his new venture, Dreamhaven, which they're just starting to get into this fall. They're starting to talk about and going to announce their new game soon. And they're about 100 people now. He was talking a little bit about how, like, they didn't know anything when they started Blizzard, and now they've learned all these lessons from their time, and so on and so forth. But I asked him about that growth question, and he was like, well, with World of Warcraft, we felt like we had to, because we had to bring in all these customer service people. We had to kind of have this layer of support that was just essential for supporting the game back then. And I don't know what we would do if we had that kind of hit today, but we're hoping not to have like these different layers of people. And like, I can't imagine this turning into as big a company as Blizzard was, essentially.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. It's kind of like, I think his position is basically that, like, at that point they did the only thing they could do, but like, I don't know. What I wonder, I didn't ask him this, but I wonder if they kind of wish, they all kind of secretly wish that WoW had been like slightly less successful. Like, what if it had 1 million players in its first year instead of 5 million players in its first year? And maybe it didn't transform the company completely, and maybe it didn't make that kind of money. I don't know. Maybe things would have looked a little bit differently, or if they just went on with the cadence they had been going on before, with like new Diablo sequels and StarCraft sequel and Warcraft sequels, rather than like this all-encompassing service game that just took over the company. I don't know. It's a fun little bit of alternate history, but I think growth, and especially exponential growth, and especially rapid exponential growth, is really the thing that A, can kill companies, and B, can make it a lot less fun to be in charge of a company.
I think it's such a interesting thought experiment to what if Blizzard stayed a private company. I was thinking about that this entire time of like, how different would that look? Like, it feels inevitable that they had to go public with that success. Like you're saying, Jason, it's just the growth there is like, okay, we need to do this just in order to facilitate the amount of attention our company's getting at this time. But like, what if they stayed private? Like, what would that have looked like? It would have been so fascinating, because the numbers that really stick out to me, and I think a lot of people don't really understand, like, once you go public, there's so much bureaucracy that goes into making any kind of decisions, especially with the C-suite, that they call to the shareholders, right? Like, it's basic corporate laws. Like, shareholders appoint the directors appoint the officers, and then everybody works under that sort of structure. And where that structure's set up, it's the same as private companies, but with public companies, you have so many more things that you have to pay attention to, because now publicly, people other than, accredited investors, friends and family, all these other specific people can buy shares in your company. And the numbers you had for the growth, it was like 2010, they made 850 million. 2011, it went down 496 million, then back up to 716, 376, 756. Like, it's a very pendulum styled industry going back and forth. And the corporate market for public companies wasn't used to seeing a pendulum styled growth industry. Like, it's a very unnatural, like, if you make fridges, you get better at making fridges and you just keep going, right? Fridge makes sense. But with game design, it's this weird, like, woo, like going all over the place. And I think shareholders in that setting, especially the ones investing in these like types of companies like Blizzard at the very start, it's also fascinating that this is happening so early in games in general. It's not like they were one of the only companies doing it now. It's like, no, back in the 90s, they were doing this when games were still new. And I think that's why it's like, feels so chaotic sometimes of like, how much are people getting paid? Who's allowed to do what, is because even the shareholders are like, what's going on? This isn't what we're used to. And that's why this industry felt so crazy to them at the time.
Yeah, and I think it's not just being public, it's also merging with a company in Activision that is driven by predictability. And there's a lot of stuff in the book about the history of Activision and how Bobby Kotick brought that company out of bankruptcy and turned it to what it is today. And I think the thing that always stood out to me was just his love for predictability. That was all he talked about. There was this acronym called SPEED that he used to use back in the day, and I forget the exact words that made up the acronym, but P was predictability. And it was just always his thing was like predictability. And you look at the franchises he's made over the years, or he's overseen over the years.
Killed.
Call of Duty comes out every fall without fail, predictable. Even when they tell their employees at Sledgehammer that the next one is going to be an expansion and not a full title, bam, it becomes a full title instead.
Right.
They come out with Guitar Hero, they come out with Tony Hawk, Skylanders, et cetera, et cetera. It's always just yearly cadence, or like even more than that. And that's because Bobby Kotick was and is all about predictability and showing Wall Street that he has everything under control and is going to hit that schedule. And Blizzard is the complete opposite. They are all about, we're going to take as long as we need to. It'll be ready when it's ready, to a fault. And you have these two opposite ends of the spectrum unable to come to a compromise, and it just causes all sorts of problems. So, yeah, I think that Wall Street and that world, the world of publicly traded companies, I think could have dealt with a pendulum company if it was a little more predictable, or if there was more of kind of like a longer term span. Yeah. I think Wall Street is willing to put up with certain things. I mean, like, investors are unpredictable and nobody really knows. Like, the stock market is just kind of a big dart throwing game. But I think that some companies are able to get away with a longer sort of time frame and a longer horizon, a longer plan. But the combination of Blizzard and Activision at a certain point became oil and water.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's easy to have the shorthand of once Activision got involved, Blizzard really sold out. They stopped having their heart and being an independent company, all this stuff. But like, it's amazing just how early it was when they sold Blizzard. And that's, again, the glory of the book, of talking about like CUC merging with a hotel company called HFS, and like all these different owners they've had throughout the years. And that's just a wild thing to think about, is like this company that built up so much goodwill, but it was always owned by just corporate heads like throughout the decades. And so like just that push of, when great game design and ambition from the developers, when does it start to teeter into the gross territory of rooting for a weird faceless corporation? I feel like that's the Blizzard story going back decades and decades here.
People don't know this. I said to Morheim when I spoke to him, Morheim, of course, being the co-founder and then CEO of Blizzard, he started Dreamhaven in 2020. It's now 2024. He has owned Dreamhaven longer than he ever owned Blizzard. They sold Blizzard in 1994 after founding it in 1991. So yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people are like, oh, Blizzard shouldn't have merged with Activision. That was a big mistake. But like, Blizzard was not independent, like, starting in 1994. And they bounced around between so many crazy corporate shenanigans, and I document them all in the book, including the massive SEC scandal that I think will raise a lot of eyebrows of people reading this book. They'll be like, wait a minute, what? Blizzard was owned by a company that was like, whose CEO went to jail and was investigated by Chris Christie? What is going on here? So fun little tidbit for people. But all the way into Vivendi, which a lot of people might know these days for its kerfuffles with Ubisoft, but back then it was having kerfuffles with Blizzard. And like, a lot of people at Blizzard, the kind of the atmosphere under Vivendi was just complete uncertainty and chaos, and people not knowing what was going on. And the founders of Blizzard North, the company behind Diablo, resigning as a result. And it was just bedlam. It was a mess. And so Activision, believe it or not, at the time when Blizzard decided to merge with them, or specifically Vivendi Games decided to merge with them to become Activision Blizzard, Activision was seen as like super stable and like an amazing
Right.
opportunity for them after years of dealing with like BS from this French water company that like
Water company.
nobody knew how to deal with. So
The
yeah,
same way
I
now
mean,
it kind of mirrors the shift to Microsoft of like, oh, finally a life raft. Oh, never mind. Turns out there are no life rafts in the game industry. Good luck.
That little
Yeah.
optimism boost in that chapter. I was like, oh, they're so happy. I'm nervous for them.
yeah,
No.
God. Now they're owned by the operating system company. So hey,
So gross. One of my favorite little oddities in the book is when you're talking about Adham, when he came back, like one of the founders, when he came back to Blizzard, and he was like, okay, I'm going to work on like incubation projects. Here we go. Let's just get down grassroots. Let's connect with these development teams again. Let's build stuff up. This is what I did for decades in the past. This will be great. And just having this bravado and having the developers be like, we don't even know who you are, dude. Like, this is not your company anymore. Like, that chapter gave me nightmares. That's such a specific feeling. This guy who thinks he's cock of the walk, and everyone who's younger is like, dude, you're irrelevant. This is not your place anymore.
yeah, it's wild for a billion different reasons. First and foremost, one thing I'm glad that I was able to do with this book and that this book story is able to tell is just kind of how pivotal Alan Adham was to the early days of Blizzard.
Yeah.
Because I don't think enough people know of him or know about the importance that he played in the creation of Warcraft and Diablo and Starcraft, et cetera, et cetera. Also, a polarizing guy, like from the very beginning. In many different, I mean, people had a ton of respect for him. Some people were terrified of him. I mean, there's a whole the gamut, the spectrum of emotions is wild. And then yes, also that's such a relatable thing because it's like I think that anyone who kind of leaves a company feeling like they played an important role, it might not feel like it's been that long, even if it's been 12 years, because so many of your formative moments were like there. And so for someone like Alan coming in, so he left Blizzard in 2004, just before WoW came out, and came back in 2016. So 12-year absence there. But because he was the founder and president and then chairman of Blizzard for what would have been 13 years before that 12-year absence, it probably didn't feel like that long to him that he was gone. So for him to come in and then people don't know who he is or the role he played, it's gotta be such a surreal feeling. Yeah, I'm with you, Ben. It's a wild thing.
I'm thinking about like how will news sites aggregate what's in this book? You know, like how will they write their own articles about it?
There's too much to aggregate. I deliberately stuffed it full of too many news tidbits and new information so that it can't be. But yeah.
But that being said, the chapter on Titan, I feel like, is going to be one that people are talking about just because it is like, the amount of work that went into and the amount of money that went into this thing. And you're describing, I'm just picturing like terabytes of concept art, you know, just like, hundreds of people working on this thing for years before they just like yank the cord out of it or whatever is kind of incredible. And it is, you know, like, I think like you said, a lot of the book's conflict is, it's artists versus corporate overlords, you know, and will you just let them have their energy? But then there is this thing of like, no, we're actually, you know, like, this is Blizzard doing the thing it wants to do with basically unlimited funds, and it just can't get it out the door. And it's like, that is not really a tale of like corporate mismanagement. It is like the thing that the company thought they were good at, which is we're just going to cook on a game until it's good and ready, completely fails them.
Yep. And then you can kind of see things from Activision's perspective being like, we let you guys spend $80 million on this debacle and you spent, God, how many, like, what is 7 years, 6 years, 7 years, depending how you count it. And on top of that, the opportunity cost is so great because you're taking the most talented people or some of the most talented people at the company and putting them out of this thing. And they didn't do anything else for 6 years. So it's just, yeah, it's mind boggling. And also you can understand why Activision's executives might look over and be like, hey, dude, we kind of need to step in and whip these guys into shape. We need to really bring some adults into the room. Whether that was a good call, whether they made the right call about who they brought in, I mean, there are a lot of questions that I think people will be asking after they read this book. And I think that fundamentally, at least my takeaway from this story and hearing the story and writing this story is that like both sides were just so on the extremes of this spectrum of like predictability and creativity, and just could not find a way to meet in the middle, which just led to all sorts of problems. And I'll let readers decide who's to blame for the inability to find compromise there. But yeah, that's what it is. Because yeah, I think even the biggest Blizzard stalwart like veterans would be like, yeah, we screwed up with this Titan thing. Like maybe we do need kind of to get our S together a little bit. So,
but then it's fascinating too, because then with Overwatch 2, they're like, oh crap, we're falling back into the exact same grooves as Titan, and that's why we cannot get Overwatch 2 out the doors. They can't help themselves.
Yeah. Well, the key to Overwatch, and I write about this in the chapter about Overwatch's development, 2 keys to Overwatch, I would say. One is that there was this willingness, as Rachel Day, who I quote in the book, points out, there was this willingness to say no to things, to be like, nope, this is not our game. This game is very focused. This is what we're doing. We're going to say no to everything else. We were just making this hero shooter. Bam, that is it. And the amount of progress they made because of that was really remarkable. But the other thing is that they only had 2 years to do it. And I think creating those restrictions can actually be a real boon for creativity, as opposed to giving people infinite time, infinite money, being like, wow, you had such a big success here and now you can go do what you want. That can create problems. That said, Overwatch 2 had other pressures too. I think there were a lot of other issues involving, especially the biggest pressure was forcing that team to do Overwatch 1 live support and Overwatch League and Overwatch 2 all at the same time. But yes, I mean, just having unbridled creativity, like unlimited creativity, can really cause problems.
Yeah,
I think I liked what you said, where I was like, also Overwatch by mistake became a live service game unintentionally, like kind of energy too, is like another thing that they couldn't really have foresight for, like the shareholders or something like that, is like, here's this big game, it's going to make so much money. And it did. But now we have to allocate all these skilled people to making skins and updates and all this other stuff. So now a chunk of there is just kind of working on free updates for a thing we already got our dividends for X years ago. And then they're going to say, well, what next? What's up? And then the cycle continues.
Yep.
The Overwatch section had a part where I was wondering if you ever felt kind of limited by this book being so interview based, you know, that you are talking to people and you are kind of creating the history of Blizzard out of their words, because there's a section on loot boxes where in the people's telling description, they're just kind of like, well, Overwatch had so many cosmetics, we just thought this was the most convenient way to do it. And oh my gosh, they're making $1 billion. And I was like, I don't believe that you actually created a perfect slot machine completely without knowledge that that's what you were doing. And it's like, I don't think that you did the wrong thing for like not writing that, if that's not what anyone said to you. But it was like a moment where it's just like, I don't know if I believe this reasoning.
I'll tell you why it's 100% true, because you look at Hearthstone, which is where they all said they got the idea from, and they had created a perfect slot machine before that. Like, you open a Hearthstone card pack, it creates the exact same effect as an Overwatch loot box, where like you have that endorphin rush of like, oh my God, what's it going to be? You have all the incredible particle effects of like the cards popping up. You guys know, anyone who plays Hearthstone or has played Hearthstone knows that like it's the exact same effect. And the Overwatch people, they essentially said, and the thing about doing a book is that you have an opportunity to really very carefully fact check as much as possible. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's some mistakes here and there in the book, because like it's impossible to write 300 plus pages without making a couple of errors here and there. But this I am very confident in, which is they essentially said, we're coming up with all these ideas of things that we want to sell. They're too kind of random, and there are too many of them to be like, we're going to do a store where you can buy skins and also sound effects and also all this other stuff. Too much miscellany. So instead, we're going to take Hearthstone card packs and just put all this stuff in that. And I think people will enjoy it. And yes, they created this phenomenon in loot boxes. And you could argue that like people then went on to manipulate them. And you could also argue that like even in Overwatch, they were manipulative, although I'm not 100% sure about that because they were given out so frequently. But like that was inadvertent. This was not a team. This was a relatively small team. This is not a team that had like psychologists on their staff the way that mobile game teams might, where they're trying to figure out what's as addictive as possible. This was literally a couple people. I think Jeff Kaplan led the effort on this. It was like people being like, "Oh, Hearthstone opening packs is cool. We're gonna take that and do it in Overwatch also."
Yeah.
That is fascinating. That is like people accidentally stumbling upon the formula for cocaine, being like, "Oh, we were just trying to like make a cake."
Which, I mean, that has happened a billion times in video game history. Like, it's not like, I don't know, Diablo is another good example. Like, that game is also, like, getting loot in Diablo is ridiculously addictive. And that wasn't, like, people being like, we're going to come up with this predatory system. It was just like, oh, this seems pretty fun. So, yeah, I think a lot of the time that sort of thing happens by accident. And oftentimes it's the imitators who are like, oh, we can make a ton of money out of this thing. And in the case of loot boxes, I mean, Star Wars Battlefront 2 is the most infamous example of just being like, we're gonna take this mechanic and really it's gonna be egregiously pay to win. But yeah, no, I do not believe that the Overwatch 1 team was like looking to prey on people when they created those loot boxes. And if they were, they would have they wouldn't have been giving them out so frequently. Like, I think if you go back and you look at comments on Reddit and like what the sentiment was around Overwatch in 2016 before loot boxes became demonized as a result of Battlefront 2 and like Shadow of War and a few other games at the time, people were not complaining about the loot boxes back then. People thought they were cool.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to the fun stuff. You ready, Jason? You stop me and unpack this when you have more to say on these things. The history of canceled games at Blizzard. Nothing more fun than hearing about this.
I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay, all right. I took notes. Bloodlines, which was a space vampire game.
Yeah, that was a Chris Metzen thing. I don't really know a lot about it. I just know that I don't think it got very far. It was kind of like Metzen had this idea. He was going around trying to sell it, and nobody was really into it.
Okay. So the origins of StarCraft, Blizzard says it started as a licensed Star Wars game, and LucasArts says, not with us, it wasn't.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So everybody at the studio was really excited to work on a Star Wars game. They even started like concepting some like AT-ATs like in Blizzard like isometric form. This is after another canceled game, Shattered Nations, which was actually announced to the public and then kind of quietly canceled. And then it was like, hey, we have this opportunity to do a Star Wars thing. Alan Adham came to everybody and said that. I spoke to the CEO of LucasArts at the time, who was like, I don't remember doing anything like that or like agreeing to anything like that. So lots of questions about how real that thing was. I certainly think there were discussions about it. Certainly got to the point where Blizzard was all informed that they were working on it. But of course it didn't happen, and it ultimately led to StarCraft, which fun bit of alternate history, but I think StarCraft probably was the wiser move.
Yep, that's the best.
Their own IP instead of relying on licensing for the next few decades.
Let's see. There's a team working on Diablo for the Game Boy. I think that's been out there a little bit, but there's a fun little factoid that they were working on that. Then Blizzard North, after Diablo, was working on Starblow, which was sci-fi Diablo. I'm assuming that's got to be just a code name, right? Just a fun code name.
Yeah, that's what they called it internally. I don't know if that's what they were actually going to call it, but it was it's that perfect name because everybody immediately knows what it is. And the context here is that after Diablo 2, Blizzard North, I mean, they talk about a chaotic studio, but they split off into two teams, essentially. One was working on Diablo 3 and the other was working on what they called Project X, which was like Dave Brevik, the lead designer of Diablo and Diablo 2, and the president of the studio was whatever he felt like working on, which changed every couple of months. So they were doing nothing, essentially. They were just like pitching ideas, changing things around. And then one day they're just like, fuck it, we're doing Starblow. And everybody's like, Starblow, because they know exactly what that means.
And it's fun to say. Like. Everybody can be into that in a big way. Yeah, that's what I mentioned.
Yeah, but of course that was canceled when the founders resigned in glorious, there's a blaze of glory or in glory. I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
Okay, then before WoW, they were working on a post-apocalyptic game called Nomad. And so you mentioned that there was concept art of like ostriches and turtles. Was this like a joust thing? Were they playable animals? Do you know anything more about what that was?
Well, that's the thing. It's like the reason it got canceled is because nobody really knew what it was. It was very difficult for the lead designer of that game to actually articulate the vision. I think part of the idea was kind of XCOM-y, like turn-based strategy sort of thing. There was some like lands of lore to it, but it was really just kind of, and it was not in development long enough for them to really know what it was.
Okay. There was basically what they did to EverQuest with WoW of kind of polishing up the ideas. They wanted to do to Minecraft, which is such a fascinating idea. And they're making a game called Avalon. That was that idea. How far did that game get?
So this is my favorite. This is everything you mentioned, other than the StarCraft RTS, which has not been public. Avalon is one of the big cancel titles that I'm revealing in this book that has not been made public before. This is Warcraft Minecraft, which people have described to me as incredibly fun to play, and like they were bummed out it was canceled. That was in development for a good amount of time, some 2 years or so. So Jay Wilson was working on that. He was the director of Diablo 3, much maligned director of Diablo 3, and Mike Booth, who was a lead on Left 4 Dead, was also working on that project.
Oh, wow.
And then it was canceled, I believe, in 2015 or so. I think it started in around 2013 and was canceled in 2015. But yeah, people who played it said it was cool. They kind of described it as like I actually, from the way it was described to me, it sounds a little bit more Dragon Quest Builders-y than Minecraft, in that there were like quests and like a storyline. You might like go to an island and like fight a dragon to steal its treasure and stuff, but it was all Minecraft style, pick up blocks and whatever. So yeah, it sounded pretty cool.
Let's see, Diablo 4, the original version, called Hades. I think you reported on this in the past about how it was third person, camera pulled in, Arkham style combat, really dark tones. It sounds wild, like permadeath for every run.
Yeah, roguelike style Diablo 4, or early version of Diablo 4. Yeah, so that was Josh Mascara's project. Josh Mascara was the director of Diablo 3, Reaper of Souls. And then after that game's second expansion was canceled, he went off to go and prototype this idea, Hades, that also was in development for a couple of years before it was canceled in favor of a more traditional Diablo 4. Called codename Fenris, that would then go on to be the Diablo 4 that we all got last year.
Gotcha. Okay, after Titan collapsed, Kaplan, before Overwatch was really formed, was considering making a StarCraft shooter. As a big StarCraft fan, I feel like there were so many seeds of like, people are ramping up on a StarCraft shooter and they're ramping down on a StarCraft shooter.
Well, hold on. We'll get to that in a second.
I want to get to that.
Yeah, so yes, that was like, I don't think that was anything more than a pitch deck. Like that was like they were considering like 4 different projects and then just landed on what became Overwatch. So that was not even more than like some art and a PowerPoint presentation. That wasn't even a prototype. Okay,
gotcha. Orbit, which was the Warcraft Pokemon Go style game. Of course, they were working on it. Everyone has to be working on one of those. The game called Odyssey, which was the survival game. That was the one that they released concept art for then?
Yeah, and I think some screenshots just got leaked, although I've heard that like that was one iteration of the game and that other iterations have looked much better. Yeah, that was the canceled survival game that was publicly announced a couple years ago, and then it was canceled as part of the Microsoft layoffs this year. Although it was a Blizzard decision to cancel it, not like Microsoft coming down and forcing them or anything like that.
Gotcha. There was Orion, which was a mobile RPG with like asynchronous turns.
Yes.
Okay, that was canceled, and that was like you make your turn, you wait a day for another person to make a turn. There's another game like this. I want to say Pluto. There's some game like this that I played at some point, but
Words with Friends.
That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Let's see. There's a Civ-like StarCraft turn-based game that was canceled.
Yes. A 4X StarCraft game. Yes.
Audio listeners, Ben is so upset about this.
No,
yeah,
Haley, please. I like RTS games, not 4X games, not a dweeb.
Yeah, I forget what the code name for that was, but yes, that was in development for a bit and canceled.
Okay, let's see. Is it Tim Morton? Was that his name? Mm-hmm. That he pitched a Call of Duty RTS because he was so desperate to make an RTS within Blizzard.
So Tim Morton, he was the production director on StarCraft 2 towards the end of StarCraft 2's life, so like 2014 and beyond. And so like he helmed the Nova covert ops stuff and taking the game free to play and stuff like that. And then after StarCraft 2 got after it became clear they weren't going to be making more direct content for StarCraft 2, he went around and tried to pitch all sorts of ideas for a new RTS, including at one point, I think out of desperation, he was like, hey, I want to make an RTS so badly. We can do it on Call of Duty if that is what it'll take to do this thing.
Just tell me what you want.
Yeah, there were some ideas that were certainly prototype. There was like a Helldivers version of Warcraft, original Helldivers, not Helldivers 2.
Right.
That was prototyped, and there were other ideas, prototypes. But really, the biggest path, there were two kind of big points of resistance to them making another RTS game. One is that most of the company's executive layer had lost faith in RTS, like didn't think it was going to sell as a genre, thought it was a dead genre, essentially, or at least not a big enough genre that the modern iteration of Blizzard could work on it, which, I mean, again, talk about growth. Like, the company that is thousands of people needs to make games on a much bigger scale than the company that was hundreds of people or less than 100 people. That's one big point of resistance. The other is that they actually didn't have the personnel for it. They didn't have a director who had experience making RTS games who was interested in making a new RTS game. And they didn't have a person who could like easily, they could envision stepping up to that role. So yeah, it just never happened. And then Tim Morton, of course, went on to start Frost Giant and release Stormgate, which just came out in early access a few weeks ago.
Yeah. The Andromeda Project, where it was within the Warcraft universe, but their take on a God of War-like game, third person. It was led by a real head over there, and then that kind of collapsed when he was outed. That was that idea?
Yes, that was led by Alex Afrasiabi, who has been named publicly in the California lawsuit as someone who was accused of sexually harassing people by many women, but who spoke to me, shared their stories to me, spoke to the lawyers in California. And that game was canceled when he was fired at Andromeda.
Gotcha. Okay. Dustin Browder at a certain point. StarCraft first-person shooter. That was like Battlefield. You reported on it a little bit in the past. I was surprised to learn that it was 3 years of development on this game that was inspired by Battlefield, but in the StarCraft universe. And then it seems like one of the dings against it was Activision's like, Battlefield, yuck, that's EA's thing.
Yes, that was a sore point for sure. Really the biggest one. So one kind of common criticism from Activision to Blizzard, one kind of talking point, nagging point, I want to say, something that they kept harping on was, hey, Blizzard, you were trying to do too much at once. And after Mike Morhaime, so Mike Morhaime, who was the CEO until 2018, he was essentially the shield that kept a lot of this stuff at bay, and he had enough clout, he had enough power at the company that he was able to resist a lot of that stuff and protect people under him from having to deal with a lot of that stuff. He left in the summer of 2018, and his successor, J. Allen Brack, notably was named as president of Blizzard instead of CEO, which was Mike Morhaime's title, which I think says a lot about the power dynamics. Suddenly, Bobby Kotick is the only CEO at Activision Blizzard. So J. Allen Brack takes over, and he is faced with this pressure, with a ton of pressure from Activision, including this point of like, Blizzard is trying to do too much. Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4 are already delayed and nowhere on track. You need to move all these people off other projects and put them on Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4. And I think J. Allen Brack was essentially given I don't know if he was given the choice of like how many projects to save or whatever, but I think he felt it was important to have a new IP in development, so he kept Odyssey around. Definitely some politics involved. Alan Adham had his own projects that were saved in this whole thing, and he was part of the exec layer at that point, so I won't get into all the details there. But yes, Ares was canceled as a result of that pressure.
Yeesh. Can't you just tell Jason's talked to a million people, because you're pulling these facts like you were in the room for every single conversation.
350 people? What's going on here?
Yeah, the Battlefield thing I just want to say is just one factor. I think there are always a ton of factors involved in these situations, but it's kind of like, hey, like, are we really going to be able to sell this game that is a lot like Battlefield to these executives whose entire lives revolve around Call of Duty? That might be a tough sell. Okay, maybe we should kill it. Like that. It all just kind of goes into the formula when trying to decide what to cancel. Is all these different factors.
So that survival game Odyssey, they brought in Dan Hay to work on it from Ubisoft and Far Cry fame, the huge guy you saw on stage over and over again at Ubisoft, muscular, strong. He could snap a tree over his knee, Haley, this Dan Hay fella.
Like an orc.
Like a straight up orc. And then after Odyssey was canceled, he was working on a StarCraft shooter, is the way you frame it in the book. Is this the first person shooter RPG that's been reported on recently?
Yeah, the one that people made hay of me saying. I'm sure you saw that post on our gaming leaks and rumors from someone who was like, I emailed Jason and asked him about this, and he said it would be teased in his book. I was like, man, I wouldn't have emailed you back if I knew you were going to do this. Yes, that is. I believe they are one and the same. So that is a project that is currently in development at Blizzard, unless it's been canceled in like the last 2 weeks and I haven't heard about it. But as far as I know, that's a project that's currently in development at Blizzard. That basically, when Odyssey was canceled, Dan Hay and a small chunk of that team went on to work on this new project that it had been kicking around even before Dan Hay wound up taking it over, and it's in very, very early days. But yes, they are once again trying to do a StarCraft shooter at Blizzard after StarCraft Ghost, after Ares, and now this new project.
And don't get your hopes up, everybody. If you've learned one thing from reading Jason's book, it's that a lot of projects are killed for a million different reasons. But in theory, having the Far Cry lead go over there and working on it, the RPG part is interesting. I don't quite know how that factors in.
I don't have an answer to that. I don't know.
Okay.
And I'm sure it's like so early in development that the details have probably changed drastically since like I first heard about it earlier this year. So yeah, the very early days on that. It's not even worth talking about like what they're concepting right now because it's all going to change over the course of development. Right. Jacob, to your point earlier, I think that's certainly one thing that I'm sure the websites will aggregate. Maybe you guys will beat them to it. Maybe they'll be like MinnMax reports that Jason Schreier said that yada, yada, yada.
Not going to read a book. We'll watch a podcast.
Exactly.
Like
well,
God intended.
It's funny. We actually, I'm working with this great team of people at Hachette, our book publisher, including a marketing person and a publicity person, and we decided to put together this little cheat sheet for people who don't want to read a book. That is like if you're a TikTok influencer or something and you don't want to read a book, here's your cheat sheet of like some 10 key points about this book that we're handing out to people.
You got to do it, but I'm sure it makes your skin crawl at the same time. But
I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. It's not. I didn't like take like news nuggets or anything. It's more general picture thoughts of like, here's what you should know about what happens in this book.
Yeah. Okay. Last one, real quick. I know this is boring for some people. I apologize. There was a mobile game, like a World of Warcraft mobile game with NetEase that was set in a different era, like far in the future or far in the past. That's the idea.
I think it was far in the past.
Okay.
This was like one of those kind of China-focused, like WoW on mobile type games. You could play like this full-on MMO on your phone. And I wonder, I mean, hypothetically, so one of the reasons that got killed is because Blizzard's relationship with NetEase fell apart as a result of Bobby Kotick and Armin Zerza having some pretty extreme disagreements with the people who ran NetEase. In theory, I guess NetEase could try to revive that now that they've since rebuilt their relationship after all that all the Activision C-suite left the company. I don't know, but yeah, that was canceled last year. I believe it was last summer, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah,
I wonder how they archive their IP. They said like a really nerdy thing, but right now I'm just thinking like, what are their file systems like? Like, how do they categorize priority for pulling stuff for other projects? If they're like, go look at the concept art we already did for X, we'll use that here. You know, do they think of that kind of stuff? It's fascinating.
It's funny you say that because on the WoW team, I heard so many different little anecdotes about there was so much inherent tribal knowledge that was just like, if one person quits, we will never know how to do this thing. Video game companies, I think, speaking broadly, I think video game companies are like infamously bad at maintaining documentation for how things get done. Yeah. So to answer your question, I mean, the lawyers like yourself probably are driven crazy by this, but there's very little archiving.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think one of the interesting things about it is it does start the way that it feels like almost any video game company story that goes back far enough starts, which is bunch of dudes, they just love games, they're sleeping there, oh, they have a big hit, they buy Corvettes, oh no, HR, like that can describe so many different video game studios. But I think one of the interesting things about the book is you have it divided into kind of like, what are they? It's rise, fall, and future. And like how early the fall part happens in the kind of Blizzard history, I think gives it a really interesting character that allows it to be more than just like a story of gaming bros who learned what it was like to own a company.
It's funny. So what happens with the book is you often send your manuscript to what's called beta readers, the equivalent of beta testers, for early feedback and like get some thoughts and get their opinion on the structure and whatever else, which is very, very helpful. And a couple of people sent me messages in the beta reading process and were like, hey, I feel like the fall is a little bit too early there. Like it feels like that's not quite when the fall begins. And I was just like, okay, I appreciate your feedback. But to me, it's exactly where it should be. The fall is like, this is kind of editorializing, kind of tipping my hand here, but like
Sure.
to me, this story is a story of a company that like got way too big with WoW. Like that to me is the fall. Like the rise is up until WoW, and in the couple years after WoW, things seemed amazing, but that was the fall. And that doesn't mean that Blizzard like tanked its reputation or lost anything at that point, because it didn't. And in fact, Blizzard was just as beloved, if not more so, throughout the early 2010s. Then possibly, more beloved than it ever was, thanks to like StarCraft 2 and Overwatch and Hearthstone. So it had some humongous hits, but to me, something was lost. And I think to a lot of people who worked in the early days of Blizzard, something was lost when WoW exploded and really transformed the company. So I was like, I appreciate your feedback, but I have the acts exactly where they should be in my mind for what this story is.
It should be
And that's
noted.
so much more poetic, right? It's like, with great power comes the fall.
Yep,
like, you know,
yep.
it's like almost tracks with like just like the underlying narrative of every company ever. It's just like, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think so. And also it's important to me. I think that like one story to come out of Blizzard is Activision came in, they invaded the place, they did some horrible things, they did some bad, like they drove a lot of people out and they created a lot of problems that Blizzard still has to deal with today. And that is a true story. But I think to be like Activision caused all of Blizzard's problems is a skewed version of that story. And I think part of what this book tries to do is capture how many of Blizzard's problems and PR snafus and just issues over the years were entirely inflicted by Blizzard, and not by Activision influences at all, or even came before Activision even entered the equation. So yeah, I think that's an important part of this as well.
Yeah. So we've barely scratched the surface of the book. So if you're intrigued by any of this and you're watching or listening, you can check out Play Nice, The Rise, Fall, and Future of Blizzard. One Jason Schreier. October 8th, this thing is dropping. Is it going to be on every bookstore shelf? Can I go into a Barnes & Noble and get this?
Every platform, PlayStation, Switch, Oculus Rift.
PS5 Pro in hands.
Yeah, you can get it. So you can get it physically at your local bookstore. You can still, by the time this airs, you'll still have about a week to pre-order it. So you should do that. My encouragement of everybody is to go pre-order from your local indie bookstore because they could use the support. But yeah, you can buy it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever. You can also buy the digital version if you prefer ebooks. And we have an audio version, which I'm sure a lot of podcast listeners will want to check out. It is read by Ray Chase, the actor best known for voicing Noctis in Final Fantasy 15. He also voiced my last two books. So
Cool.
he's now my guy. But really, I just like to think of him as the Persona 5 subway announcer.
It's important, I think. So, yeah. Jason, thanks so much for your time. And thanks for putting some game history down there, man. Great job.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, all of your years of hard work. You can sit back and relax and savor it. Don't read too many tweets and YouTube comments about it. Don't savor it that way. Savor it with your own sense of accomplishment, please.
Oh, man.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much, everybody, for watching, listening to this MinnMax discussion. You can always subscribe to our channel for a lot more like it. Maybe one more like it that Jason's on. A lot more other content that is interested in gaming history. So you can check us out and help support us. We appreciate it. But until next time, we'll see ya. Bye, everybody.
See ya.
If you thought, hey, this video wasn't bad, well, there's a whole lot more like it on MinnMax's YouTube channel. Please help us out by subscribing to our channel and checking out the MinnMax Show podcast, also available on your favorite podcast app, the best, most thorough discussion about games on the internet with the deepest dive, our monthly community trivia show with prizes called Trivia Tower, and a whole lot more. Thanks so much for your support, everybody. All you gotta do is click that subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it.